Hi, this is Mark Farnham with Apologetics for the Church. With me today is Michelle Perez, our Director of Marketing. And we are especially pleased to have on our podcast today the author of Mama Bear Apologetics, Hillary Morgan Ferrer. And we have an exciting podcast for you to talk about this book and all the books that have come as a result of that, the ministry as a whole. So Hillary, welcome.
Thank you so much.
This book has probably become the most talked about apologetics book that I've heard of. I've been in apologetics for almost 20 years, and this is singularly unique and also has made a big impact. I would go so far as to say that no one has done more to draw moms and women into apologetics than you have through this book. So share the genesis of the book with us and what got you interested in apologetics and what led to this specific book.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for those kind words. That's quite a compliment. But so I've actually been into apologetics since I was about 12. I was introduced when I was 12 from my pastor from the pulpit. Kind of had gotten away from it a little bit in my college years. When I got married, my husband and I actually bonded over apologetics. He was just finishing his MDiv from Southern Evangelical, was a student of, Norman Geisler, Gary Habermas, all the people. He was there at the same time as Frank Turk. So he and Frank now work together in the ministry. And so I loved apologetics. I thought I was going to be the little woman following him around as he did all of his talks because he has his PhD now. And then I was made aware by a girl who had a ministry specifically for women in apologetics. And I said, well, why do we need one for women in apologetics? Why can't we just do apologetics? And she kind of made it known to me that there was a large demographic of women who wouldn't read something unless it was by women for women. And that just absolutely blew my mind. And I went straight from who's equipping the women and shot past that and said, no, who's equipping the moms? And so for whatever reason, the Lord just put this burning desire of, oh my gosh, we need someone to be equipping the moms. So we actually started Mama Bear Apologetics. I went out and found a couple of friends who maybe wanted to join me in doing this ministry. And we thought, we'll do some podcasts, have a couple blogs, stuff like that. But I mean, less than a year later, we had a publisher reaching out asking us to write a book. And there was actually a different book that I was working on at the time, which they turned down, which thankfully it was, as the Lord would have it, I'm finally working on now, 10 years later. And I said, I bet you they want a Mama Bear book first. And so they did. But here's where I think what I did with Mama Bear is different is I didn't want to have a book that was like any other book out there. I figure if there's really good books out there, I just want to be able to refer people to them. I don't need to recreate a really great book. We don't need another, cold case Christianity. We don't need, some of these amazing books. I was like, I don't want to recreate that. I want to refer people to that. So Natasha Crane actually had a series of books that had all sorts of questions and answers for parents of these are some of the questions your kids might ask. And so what I did is I wrote all those questions out that from her books and from other books and all the books that I could find. And then I categorized them by what worldview was really creating these questions to begin with. Like what was the main worldview that was the underlying, the misconceptions. And so that's how we actually organized the book around that. Was, okay, all these questions had to do with the idea that science can tell us everything. All these questions had to do with the nature of truth. All these questions had to do with the fact that people are so hyper skeptic about Christianity when they're not that skeptical about anything else in their life. We even had an added chapter while we were going of Marxism, which I wasn't even planning on doing, but it became so clear that as we were working on the feminism chapter, because you have all these questions about gender and about, women in the Bible and all the different things, we're like, wow, if we're going to talk about feminism, people need to understand Marxism because you can't understand one without the other. And then, of course, things like, pluralism and progressive Christianity was just becoming really a real big issue at the time. So I got several other women that I enjoyed and said, let's write the book together while I kind of oversaw most of it. But it was a really sweet time. We enjoyed doing it. And the reception of this book was just beyond what we really expected to have happen. And so really it really has paved the way for the ministry for the last 10 years or so.
That's great. Yeah, I've been amazed and pleased with the impact of the book as well. I think it really found a niche that was unaddressed.
Yeah.
And as the dad of two daughters who have children of their own, they're on the front lines of answering those questions all the time. And my older daughter, who's a pastor's wife, wanted me to tell you that she loves the book. It's
Aw,
in the top three that she recommends to people when they ask questions, and she has found it really useful with
good.
her own children. I have 9 grandkids now, and I wanna see every one of those children grow up, thinking through these things and being able to answer those questions for themselves. So this is a fantastic, book that has filled a huge gap. We
Oh.
have a few questions for you. You've said, "Faith in Jesus saved my life, but apologetics saved my faith." And you said you were introduced to apologetics at the age 12. What was that like? You said you heard it from your pastor, and how much did that spawn in you a desire to learn on your own?
Oh, very much. I mean, I can practically, it's I'm almost like a BCAD kind of situation of, before that sermon series and after that sermon series, I was just almost two different people in the sense of what I thought about. So the sermon series that he did from the pulpit, the first one he did was the Liar, Lord, Lunatic series. And he just spent an entire sermon on each of those going through logic, using logic and reason to say this does not make sense to call Jesus anything other than one of these three things. I'd say we kind of have a fourth one now, legend, that people have tried to put into there. But
Mm.
so he went through that. Then he went through the reliability of the New Testament documents, and I'm sure he used a lot of the stuff by Josh McDowell and evidence that demands a verdict. And then probably one of the most impactful things that he did was he took every single alternate explanation that people have posited for the resurrection and spent a whole Sunday on each of
Wow.
them, showing how this does not make sense. I mean, it takes, as Frank likes to say, it takes more faith to believe in that than it does to be a Christian. And that was the first time, number one, that I'd ever realized that the Bible and Christianity itself had testable claims. It was always presented to me as this is something that we do as a family. This is something we have faith in. This is what we believe is true. And I always did believe it was true because, children at a certain age, they believe what you tell them.
Mhm.
I was coming to that pivotal time where all of a sudden I was looking at things for myself. And these were questions that it hadn't occurred to me to ask, but they were the kinds of things that I know for a fact I would have been asking later. And when I saw how you could reason through these and how it did not make sense, it did not make logical sense to believe anything else. I would say that cemented my faith more than anything else in my life. And even to this day, when I go through struggles or when I'm like, I'd say one of the biggest times that I get hit is during prayer, is I know that we are to labor in prayer. And there's always that little commentary in the back of your mind going, you're just talking to the air. No one's actually listening to what you're saying. And I'm thinking, no, there is a God who's there. I know this because I know the resurrection. I know this because of what I know from science of, the formation of proteins specifically. That would be one of my big things within intelligent design and science, that yes, there is a God. Yes, he is listening. Yes, Jesus was the one he sent, and I can have that faith
Mm.
on what he said. But the fact that it happened, that is something I believe that I can know because, I mean, I guess there could be another miracle. I kind of go through in talks that I've done on this and in my grad school classes, I actually went through how every other belief you can have about the resurrection involves a different kind of miracle. So you just got to pick your miracle. Um, and so, and I would say even now, that is what I always go back to whenever I'm tempted to doubt Christianity, to doubt God, doubt Jesus, that I go back to that. And that is what I anchor myself in.
Yeah, so that leads right into our next question. If you could share a little bit about how apologetics has helped to anchor your faith through the storms of life as you went into adulthood.
Yeah. So first off, I'm just going to plug a friend of mine's podcast, and she's actually one of the authors of the book, TC Cannon. She has a podcast called True Comfort, where she actually talks
Mhm.
to a lot of top apologists about how apologetics has helped their faith through suffering. So I have an episode on there. I'll say my particular type of suffering is I just have a lot of health problems. I've always had health problems, even as a kid going through school. They had to give me special permission every single year to go on to the next grade level because I missed more class days than you were legally allowed to miss. I would say health has very much steered a lot of the career decisions that I've made. Just a couple years after my husband and I got married, I was young, I was 31 and found myself with the kind of cancer that they told me my demographic was older Black men. So it was a small intestinal cancer, so I had a pretty major surgery for that and about 7 months of chemo. And even now, so, like, as I was finishing one of the other books on sexuality, I had another, kind of cancer that it was a tumor that grew, but thankfully, it actually ended up not being cancer, but that surgery has wiped me out for, like, the past 5 years, and so there will be times when I'm going to speak where I can't travel without my husband, sometimes I just can't move, sometimes I'll sleep for 30 hours at a time because I'm
Mhm.
just that tired, and I can't predict when it's gonna happen, so it's like all the health stuff and the fact that all this happened, especially the first cancer, right when my husband and I would be thinking about having kids. So the fact that I don't even have children, to me, is one of the great ironies that the Lord would call me to do something for moms. Um, so I would say just, in the past, I've struggled with depression. I think a lot of that does have to do with my energy levels. When my energy levels go down, I feel John and I call it "I'm worthless" o'clock. It's, for some reason,
Ah,
the file of "I'm tired" and "I'm worthless" accidentally got stapled together somewhere in my history. I don't know how. But the Lord, for the most part, I'm kind of free from that more so, and I understand what's going on, especially when I'm tired. But I mean, just through all the things that you could say, why isn't God good? Why isn't He healing this? Why can't He just give me peace? All the different things that someone would say, that it's my own kind of suffering. But even though I call it my own kind of suffering, I also call it something else. I call it His rod and His staff. And it says
Mhm.
in Psalm 23, "Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." And
mm,
so I have seen Him use this
Mm.
illness in so many different ways to say, I want you to walk here. I don't want you to walk here. And by the way, when you walk here, you're going to know for a fact that it's on my energy, it's on my strength, it's on my everything. You are not the brains behind this operation. You're not even the body behind this operation. It's me. And I could be on my face on the floor, not able to move up until the moment when I walk on stage. And then suddenly I can just do what I love doing, and then I can get off and go crash again. And the Lord's like, that was me. But thank you, my daughter, for being faithful to what I've called you to do.
mm. It's great. You and I share something in common that is chronic illness,
Hmm.
and that you realize you do apologetics in weakness.
Yes.
Don't often feel physically strong, and yet God, as you said, gives the grace when you need it. I was diagnosed out of the blue 20 years ago with end-stage renal disease
Mm.
and declined for 5 years, suffered all through my doctoral work with declining health, chronic fatigue, just illness, and then had a kidney transplant in 2010, and then was really good again for a while, though always having to take immunosuppressant medication. I have to do that every 12 hours for the rest of my life. And then 6 years ago, getting both a brain tumor and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in my
Oh, wow.
abdomen in the same month, and going through 7 months of chemo and surgeries. And I thought I was going to die. I was preparing to die, and by God's grace, He raised me up. We do this in weakness.
Hmm.
It's not from a position of strength physically, but spiritually, it is a place of strength because apologetics not only helps us engage others, it reassures and strengthens our own faith. And I would place my life like you do before apologetics and after apologetics because it changed everything. It deepened my walk with God, deepened my love for theology,
Yeah.
for the scriptures, and gave me a confidence that I had been looking for years when it came to sharing the gospel with other people.
Oh,
So
I
thank you
love
for
that.
sharing that. Some people assume apologetics is too heady or abstract for kids. What do you say to parents who feel that way? I would even testify I'm now once a week on a Zoom call with my two oldest grandsons who are 9 and 6.
I love it.
Yeah, teaching them They're homeschooled, and so I have an hour with them each week, and yet I struggle with knowing how much can they understand, how much should I share with them? So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in fact, when I saw that question, I was like, "That's a really great question." It actually made me start thinking
Sure.
about it. And here's a good job. Here's one of the things that I think has honestly happened. I think that that's a projection of adults onto
Mhm.
kids because I think in a lot of ways adults have forgotten what it's like to be curious.
Mm,
That we have, maybe answered. It's like whatever questions we've had, we've already answered, or if something hasn't really affected our lives, we just move on. Now, the Lord has given me probably like the most childlike quality that I have is I have an endless level of curiosity and I have this insatiable desire to know and to understand. And I would say that that's kind of how the Lord has oriented most of my ministry is trying to so obsessively understand stuff, but not just for me. I come from a history of not only science, but of teaching science. And I had to be able to teach things like, complex chemistry to kids who would be in remedial classes and in a way that I anticipated every question that they might have so that basically I didn't look stupid in front of the class when I couldn't answer it.
mhm,
And so I think that kids are way more curious than we give them credit for, and they can actually handle a lot more. I'll give an example. My husband and I years ago were brought in to do at a church we went to like 10, 15 years ago, something with the middle school and high school. Where it was called Stump the Pastor. And my husband was a former pastor. And I kid you not, one of the questions from a sixth grader was, what is the difference between Gnosticism and Satanism?
wow.
Like, so this tells you, number one, he knew what Gnosticism was and he knew what Satanism was, and he had found a lot of overlap and he wanted to know how they didn't overlap. We don't realize, I mean, they didn't have to use the Dewey Decimal System to go look up stuff. They can just put their question into the computer, Mr. Google, Dr. Google, and start getting questions and answers. And so they are already asking things and they are getting a lot of good information and they're getting a lot of bad information. So I think that starting out kind of small of maybe like, okay, we're going to stick with factual things, how can we look at the facts of Christianity? That's kind of more of a concrete level that they can learn. And then we start learning about how do historians gather information about ancient texts. And I love what J. Warner Wallace does, where he takes you through what it's like to be a detective in looking at these things. Because I think every single kid loves the idea of being a detective and trying to come to the knowledge of the truth. And then maybe as they get older, in their teens, they start wanting to understand how all this stuff, mixes together. How do we put our Christianity together with our politics? How do we put Christianity together with our sexuality beyond the just, God said, don't do it till marriage. It's the great, Nike verse, just don't do it. Or the reverse Nike. That's what my Amy calls it, the reverse Nike campaign, the just don't do it
Mhm,
campaign. They are already asking these questions. And when we think that they can't understand the answer, number one, we think too low of them. I mean, goodness, back in the day, Jewish boys memorized the entire Pentateuch by the time they were 12. And then here's us. We can't remember why we walked into a room.
mm,
Oh yeah, I was gonna, grab the pen. I couldn't even remember. But I mean, this is the kind of information they have. Our kids have this ability. We have forgotten what kinds of abilities they have. And I would say a lot of times you'll be talking to a kid. I've seen this plenty of times. You'll be talking about something, telling a story, and they're like playing with their nails, playing with something. And sometime 3 weeks later, all of a sudden they bust out with practically verbatim what you said. And you're like, holy
mhm.
cow, you were actually listening. And you didn't realize it. So I would just say stop underestimating them and stop assuming that they're as not curious as you are if you're not a curious person. Those were my two things of why I think adults think that kids can't handle this.
So, you talk a lot about the idea of pre-bunking bad
Mhm.
ideas, which I think is fantastic. You describe what we need to do to prepare our kids to think well when they encounter these things as they are going to in life. So, could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, was it in Proverbs where it says, one person's story sounds right until another comes and cross examines him? That when we present just one side of the story, our kids can imbibe this truth, but the second that they have someone cross examine them, everything can fall apart if they haven't learned how to actually defend that truth. And so this is one of the analogies I like to give. It didn't used to be such a charged analogy, but now that we have like the whole vaccine controversy, it is. So originally, what vaccines were is you would take a virus and you would remove the DNA out of it. So basically, did not have a virus that could replicate itself. But what it did was you had this shape of a virus. And so everything in your immune system goes off of shapes where your body recognizes a shape and says, that's not a shape that belongs in my body.
Mhm.
I am going to create an antibody that is like a lock and key that will go and basically fit to it like a glove and disassemble it. So what you have is when you give it a virus that no longer has the DNA, the body says, okay, I need to make this shape and I need to make a whole bunch of them because I have no idea how many of these are coming. What that does is that if the body is actually exposed to a live version of the virus, you basically have an entire army of antibodies that are ready with that exact shape to, to go to town to seek out and destroy. And that is how the immune system works. It has a memory to it where it always knows what kind of organism has been in the body that it has to fight against, and it can remember that forever. Once it has it once, it can remember it forever. I would say this is what we're trying to do with really bad ideas. Is a bad idea if it blindsides you and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to answer that. That can actually wreck a kid so badly. But if we as parents and as youth workers and uncles and aunts and grandpa bears and everybody, if we are introducing these ideas to them in a really safe way and then showing them how they don't follow the laws of logic, they don't follow the biblical worldview, and it leads to a lot of bad outcomes, and this is not true. What is going to happen if those kids will a lot of times have that memory? They may not even have the memory enough to remember the details of what you said, but what they do remember is they remember the feeling of this is a satisfying answer. I would say until I went to grad school, I couldn't remember every single one of the things behind the resurrection, but I remember that feeling so vividly of, yes, he's right. He just explained that. It's a satisfying answer, and it doesn't make sense to disbelieve that. And I was able to hold on to that and then go look for the information again later, but I had the history of
Mhm.
knowing that there was a satisfying answer. And I would say that our kids are looking to have something that is a satisfying answer. The more satisfying answers they get, the more their mind will predict this question I have in the future that I haven't asked yet probably has a satisfying answer because all these other questions that I've had
Mm.
have I had satisfying answers. Now let's look at that in the opposite way. If a kid, every time that they have a question, it gets shuffled off, or hey, let's go get a pizza instead, or just have more faith, they have a history of
Mm.
these questions don't have answers. So therefore, in the future, when I have a question, I have no faith that that question is going to have an answer. In fact, I won't even go looking for it
Wow.
because I assume it doesn't exist because nothing's ever been answered before. And so I'm assuming this one's not going to be answered either. It's a type of intellectual learned helplessness. And that is
Mm,
what we're trying to bypass with getting our kids to understand things early on.
that's great. One of the things you talk about in the book is cultural analysis
Mhm.
in the chapter on the discerning mama bear. You talk about recognizing the message, and I find this to be so important. Carl Truman, who was one of my professors, talks
Oh,
about
cool.
how the rise and triumph of the modern self has come about just as much through culture, through literature and music and movies and works of art than it did through philosophy. What are some keys to helping moms or any person discern for their children the message of a cultural expression in a way that's conducive and not just we're only going to watch Christian
Yeah.
works of art?
Yes. Well, I think being able to have a name for all those different ideas is probably the number one thing you can do. In fact, this is one of the things that I think has made our book do really well is it didn't come from me getting some PhD in philosophy. It came from me being exposed to all of these ideas, how have I been able to answer those? Oh, yes, and all of these, I have enough education to say all of these have names. And here's what the names are. And so even every chapter, we kind of, have a sort of tongue in cheek, phrase and then the actual name of that ideology, kind of like, the brain is trustworthy according to the brain. That's this, idea of naturalism, or you're wrong to tell me that I'm wrong. We've got that moral relativism and stuff like that. So I think giving people the language to talk about something is one of the most empowering things that you can do. And since this book, it's like the number one feedback that I've gotten from women reading this book is they've had this idea, all this stuff was going on, they couldn't quite put their finger on it. And now that they see it, and now that they have a name for it, they can't unsee it. And so it
Amen.
basically, my husband jokes about, this book is not like dumping a whole bunch of new information in, like I'm having to memorize all this stuff, because let's be honest, moms have a lot going on in their brains of like keeping everybody's schedules and everybody's health and doctor's appointments and everything running. They don't have a lot of extra room for just random factoids that they're not going to use. But if they could have a label maker to stuff that they have already noticed, there is no mom who isn't just a little bit obsessed with getting a better organizational system so that
That's
she can
true.
access things.
Absolutely.
You're sitting there, you're like,
Really all
testify, girl,
moms.
testify. Um, that this book is kind of like a label maker. It gives her a way to make sense of what she's already noticed, gives her the words to use it, and then how to talk about it. And it gives a way to talk about it, not in a way that, as much as I love Charlie Kirk and I love what he did, he had a very confrontational nature of the way he went about things. So what a lot of times women have stayed out of apologetics because women are really wanting to maintain that relationship. So how do we have these conversations while maintaining the relationship? So that first step, so we call it the ROAR method: recognizing the message, offer discernment, argue for a healthier approach, and reinforce with your kids. That you first identify all the different aspects of it. And then our next step, which is one of the most important, is you affirm where is our common ground first. Because every ideology, I don't know how bad it is, there's some sort of motive, there's some sort of problem that the person who adopts that ideology is trying to solve. And guess what? You can usually agree on that problem, and you can usually affirm that motive. And so when you can stand side by side and say, here's all the stuff we agree on first, now let's talk about maybe the way we would actually go about solving that. And that's where you can start kind of offering more discernment on, how do we actually solve this problem? Or how would you actually think about this? It allows women to not only talk with each other, to talk with their family, their friends, but teach their kids how to go through each of these steps. In fact, when I talk, I say to moms, you need to start getting your kids on these hand motions that you say, everything is a mixture of a little bit, partial truths and partial lies. Our goal is to separate the truth from the lie, accept the truth, reject the lie. And so anytime they're going to think about something, you can do the hands. Okay, looks how we've got a combination. Kids, oh yeah, okay, so it's the truth and the lie. Okay, so here's some of the truths that are there, but maybe this really isn't true, so I accept this and then I'm going to reject this. It gives them a way to talk about it, and that's what we want. We want our kids to know that these things will be mixed together. If we make everything all safe and or all dangerous, these are all the Christian stuff, this is the non-Christian. That's all safe. That's all dangerous. It trains them to go into autopilot. And I will
Mhm.
tell you, autopilot is a bad place to be. My husband and I have personally attended churches, just visited, I'll say that, just visited, a church where not only did they drop the F-bomb from the stage, they had it in the lyrics of a song that they were singing, and they referred to God as she. So
Wow.
if we think that sending our kids to church, they're not going to have to be guarded, we are wrong. In fact, I was talking to one of my mama bears that one of the most searched things in regards to Christianity that people are searching on the internet right now is, how do I find an Orthodox church? There's
Wow.
so many churches teaching absolute nonsense out there that people can't even find an Orthodox believing church. Teaching our kids how to find the good and the bad, separate the good from bad, accept the good, reject the bad, that will help them in school, that will help them in church, that will help them in politics, everywhere they go for the rest of their life. They just need to know this is the process of how we think about this.
Mhm. And you're right, giving a name to ideas is so important. When I started studying Marxism, to learn the focus of dividing people and encouraging conflict, and
Yes.
saying that, the only thing that will ever solve this is for the working class to overthrow those in power. Once you attach those ideas to Marxism, you see how Marxism still exists today and how it creeps into even seemingly innocent cultural expressions.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
good.
I'd say that's one of the biggest ones actually right now, this whole, oppressed versus oppressor, it's just
Yeah,
everywhere.
that's right. I've had several friends who've come to faith in Christ when their kids were teenagers. And for some of them, the radical transformation of the home did not trickle down to the kids
Yeah.
because they had grown up with a worldview and a way of life that was so opposite of that. Any hope or encouragement for those who are starting late on teaching their kids and giving their kids discernment?
Yeah, I would say that, it's as long as you're breathing, it is never too late. If they came to Christ when their kids were teenagers and adults, then who's to say that their kids are, can't as well? And I would say that a couple different things. Number one, kids can sometimes learn more through you repenting of your mistakes than they ever will from watching your perfections.
Mm,
That I find that the best time for me to teach something is as I'm learning it, because as I'm learning it, I'm like, okay, I don't understand this, I don't understand that, or that. Okay, how do these things fit together? And knowing that I'll have to explain it to somebody else actually helps me learn it better. And I already have those questions. Back when I taught my chemistry students, I would say, you need to remind me when I use a word that you haven't heard because I forget what I didn't know back when I didn't know it. So I would say if there's a parent who is actually learning this stuff, this is a way that they can humble themselves in front of their children, not only and say, I wish I'd done this with you, but they can also say, hey, this is something I'm learning about. Do you mind? I'm a verbal processor. Will you talk about this with me? And then they can have these conversations, and it's not I'm the parent trying to teach my adult child this, and here's all the things, and the adult child's going, you can't tell me what to do anymore. Instead, it's more of a peer talking to a peer, and hey, let's talk about this. And you start planting ideas that maybe you don't even realize that you're planting. It really gives God space to work. But ultimately, one of the best examples or best analogies that I like to use, because I have times all the time where I'm like, what am I doing? Am I making any difference in this world? Is there any reason? It's like, am I having any thoughts that someone else isn't already having? I just need to, eat worms and go home. I'm sure I'm worthless o'clock at the time. Um, but or I think how disappointed God's in me. I'm not doing things well enough. If when I start thinking of my job as a Christian, like God, it's like every day is take your daughter to work day. Take your daughter to work day was something that they had. I don't know if they still do that, where you take your child to work and you give them little tasks to do. And so they get to learn what it's like to work in an actual work environment. Now, let's think about that. No father is giving his daughter a task that's going to make or break the company. No father is giving his daughter a task that is just so far beyond her abilities unless he's planning to help her with it. Everything he's asked her to do, he can already do himself. He enjoys having her work alongside of him. And if she doesn't get it done well enough, he's not going and it matters, he's not going to leave it undone. And so we see this sometimes where I wonder how missionaries feel when they hear these stories of all these, Muslims having dreams and coming to Christ. I wonder if any of them are like, why does he need us then? He could just give people dreams. Yeah, he could, but he doesn't. You know why? Because he enjoys us working alongside of him. So I think if we could change our mind of thinking everything's up to me, the world is on my shoulders, I have to make sure it happens, and say, you know what, Lord, man, I can't believe I was blind for that long. Please help me be able to present this to my kids. I can't do everything. You are the one that changes hearts. But as far as it depends on me, I'm going to work alongside my father and do the best that I can. And where I fail, I trust that you will pick up the pieces and then release it to him. And I know that's a lot harder for a non-parent to say, because no parent wants to be like, well, if it works, it doesn't, que sera,
mm,
for their own children. But at the same time, I mean, that's the tension that we have between we are called to work, we are called to do, we are called to serve, and he gives us tasks, and it's completely up to him
yeah.
to actually do the work. So I think sometimes just getting your emotions in check, getting in check that fear, getting in check that anxiety, all those different things. Sometimes picturing something you can't understand, like going to work with your dad, can help you know how to approach something that's anxiety and fear producing in real life.
It's good. I often say God is doing a great work of salvation in this world, and he invites us to participate for our joy.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of pressure off if it doesn't all depend on me and what I say. Did I say it right? Could I have said something else? No, God can use our efforts with our children or in our apologetics, and he doesn't need us. He's the power behind it, but he
Mhm.
invites us to be a part of it for our joy. And don't we experience joy when we have opportunities?
Oh, it's delightful when we can tell that the Lord is using us. And like
Yep.
when we say God can use anything, like honestly, I know people who have stories of coming to Christ from some horrible person raising up a turn or burn sign at some, intersection. And all of a sudden, that's what and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know where I'm going. God
Mm,
can use anything. And I would never say, hey, we should all go out with turn or burn signs. Like, that's a great idea. But it just shows the Lord really can use anything. So that's where we give him everything that we've got and
Mhm.
then allow him to use it. And again, just picking and whenever you're tempted to feel like I'm not doing well enough, picture yourself as the parent and your daughter's supposed to, I don't know, like, shred some documents and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm not shredding these well enough." And she's getting all freaked out. You'd be like comforting her, being like, "No, do your job with the shredding. If it's not perfect, I'll help take care of it." And that's how the Lord sees us as well, I really think. He wants us to do our best and to do what He's commanded us to do, but He doesn't want us to take the world on our shoulders and think that it's up to us.
that's good. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your other book, Mama
Mhm.
Bear Apologetics Guide to
Oh,
Sexuality. And I hear
I got
there's a
it.
new edition
So
coming out that adds gender. Oh, look at the new edition.
this
Okay.
just came out this month. I just got this like
Oh,
a
that's
week ago.
exciting.
Mm.
You describe gender theory as an idea we never expected to need to prepare our kids for. And I think a lot of us are feeling that. So, from your perspective, where do you think it came from? And why has it gained such traction so quickly in our culture?
Mhm. So this is one of those things where you change the language and you change people's understanding of reality. So we had always had like this was not considered something that anybody would have to talk about. If you think back, do you remember the movie Kindergarten Cop? And the big joke was that is the kid that kept standing up going, "Boys have a blank and girls have a blank." And he's like, "Thank you for that profound knowledge." Well, that would be considered hate speech nowadays.
Yeah.
But what
Wow.
happened was we had a different idea of that gender and sex are different.
Mm,
Like, we had these 2 different words because there were certain things that were gendered without being sexed, like, you look at just all of language, you have your masculine, your feminine, nouns and all of verbs and all the stuff like that that you have to change things through, and those are obviously not sexed. It's not like those 2 words can make a baby or something like that, but they were gendered. But when we start separating those concepts, all of a
mm,
sudden kids started thinking these can be different, and there was a concerted effort to make people think that these were 2 different concepts. And sadly, even just using that language is like a tacit affirmation that those are different. Um, so I would say one of the biggest triumphs of this book, I would say, would be I was not able to go into gender as much as I liked or as much as I wanted to in the first book. And that was also right when I kind of had to stop my efforts short when I had major, major, major surgery.
Mm.
So I was able to kind of do the things in this one that I wasn't able to do with that. And so here is where, if you look at the very final afterword in that book, it's titled "Things to Repeat to your kids until they want to gag." And it's this idea that a good maxim buries into their head like an earworm and they can't get rid of it. And so one of the ones that I added to this for gender is that interest, personality, and aptitudes are on a spectrum. Gender is not. I would say this concept of personality, interest, and aptitudes. If you talk to any person struggling with transgenderism and ask them, why do you think you're the opposite gender? I have yet to come across any story that didn't have to do with personality, interests, and aptitudes. And so the way I explain it in this book, and this is where I think it can be a really simple explanation. This would be one of those pre-bunking ideas before the kids have something funky come down later. Is that we actually I use graphs in here So hopefully, are you okay if I show you some of the graphs that we use
Please
in
do,
Discernment?
yes.
Please do. I'm
It's
actually,
hard
yeah.
to describe without seeing a picture of it. So this concept that if you're familiar with what a bell curve is, you have a bell curve that kind of tells you what's the normal spectrum. That's where the spectrum is of this trait. So we can have two bell curves, one for the men and one for the women, one for the boys, one for the girls, one for the males, females, however you want to say it. And there can be general sex differences between them, but there's still room. So here's like something where this top one here, you see the
Mhm.
two peaks on there. That would be a general sex difference. So this one in particular, I think I have things like the amount that they like wrestling or how much they like talking about their feelings. You have these two spectrums where one side is love, talking about their feelings. The other side is they would rather die than talk about their feelings. And you have two curves. Some guys love talking about their feelings as much as the persiest girl, and
Mhm.
some girls would rather eat, a brick or eat dirt or whatever, than talk about their feelings. I have a friend of mine from Dallas who has like 17 fantasy football leagues going every single year.
Wow.
And she is obsessed with fantasy football. And yet I also have friends that have sons that really love to dance and they could not care less about football. So here's what we have is we have two different spectrums that are going on. So this particular one, I did love of wrestling. So what if you had, let's see, which one is that one? Love of wrestling. So what if you had, the boy that's over here doesn't like wrestling, the girl over here who loves wrestling? You can see that there's a place. It's like what you tell your kids is you're like, hey, is there room for a boy like you or a girl like you? Absolutely. There's room for a boy like you or a girl like you. Now, if we were to look at this graph from up top, this is what it would look like. It would
Mm,
take a two-dimensional graph and put it into a one-dimensional graph. All of a sudden, one end is labeled masculine, one end is labeled feminine,
Mm.
and where these dots land tells you if you're more of a guy or more of a girl. Instead of saying there's room on the spectrum for a boy like
mm,
you and there's room on the spectrum for a girl like you, it takes that graph and condenses it in a way that comes to different conclusions. So if we can show them what is happening
Mhm.
before this starts getting confusing, when they come home and say, well, I'm starting to question my gender. Okay, that's a tough one, sweetie. Let's talk about why you're trying to question your gender. Well, I feel this or I feel that. Okay, let's make that. So what would that be? Would that be your love of art? Is that your love of dance? What is that? Okay, let's make that graph. Is there room for a boy like you on that graph? Yes.
mm.
In
Mm.
fact, one day you're going to have a woman who loves you for these exact qualities. And that is what we're basically saying until they want to gag. There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by a guy named Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah.
And he has a phrase in there that says the brain has a hard time distinguishing between that which is familiar and that which is true, which means the more you hear something, the
Mm,
truer it sounds. And so we need to be like, you know what? That's the way God created us. So I'm going to make sure that what my kids hear from me over and over again is so familiar that it's going to crowd out everything that the world is trying to familiarize them with. Because if they're going to believe something that's true, I want it to be because they've actually thought through it, not because it just kind of sounds true because they've heard it so many times.
that's good. I've done a lot of reading in the last year on re-enchantment that for many years a secular impact on our society disenchanted things.
Mm.
And now there's this move toward re-enchantment, which I see all over the place. Even those who would claim to be atheists believe in things like crystals and horoscope. So
Oh, yes.
they come around full circle back to a form of pantheism. I loved in your book on page 175, you quote Frederick Heidemann, I was an atheist until I read Lord of the Rings. I've never seen that quote before, and I can totally relate to it, not because it's my story, but when you are gripped by a story that has such profound supernatural and immaterial realities behind the story, so many people across a wide swath of culture and time and preferences are drawn to that story because of the powerful undertones. And I
Hmm.
think today, not only do we have to give our kids the intellectual arguments for Christianity and the answers that they want to know about historical reliability and things like that, but also to help them to see the beauty and power of the Christian faith so that even when they doubt because of some intellectual argument, they are gripped by the story of Scripture, the story of God in our world, and sometimes that will override any intellectual concerns.
Yep.
As you deal with children because they're so moved by stories, any reflections on that idea?
Oh, so Holly Ordway, who's a former professor from Houston, it was back when it was Houston Baptist, now it's Houston Christian, has a book called Apologetics in the Imagination that's
Mm.
really, really good. That really talks about how sometimes you can't see a certain, or you can't believe a certain truth until you can kind of picture it in your mind. And I would say that that's what stories do. They can help us picture. They give us categories for things that we already know are true.
Mm.
Um, and I'm kind of playing around with this concept with the book that I'm working on right now. This idea that, we have intellectually what, we can defend for being true, but there's like this kind of emotional reaction to something that seems true or it seems plausible or it seems believable. And that is built through the types of stories that we hear. So I would say that this is actually one of those ways that we are seeing Hollywood really try to destroy our kids' idea of objective good and objective evil. If we
Mhm.
look at how all of these fairy tales are being rewritten, they're being rewritten with the villain as the good guy that was
Oh,
just
I could totally
misunderstood, and the good guy is actually the oppressive evil guy that we, hadn't realized it. And now that we look a little closer, we can tell this is actually the bad guy. I'd say this is, essentially behind. I watched Wicked and Wicked for Good to do some Mama Bear podcasts on it. That we are introducing this category, and this is something I actually talked about just within the last couple of weeks. That are you familiar with just the Luciferian worldview? Okay, so some parents don't know about this. The Luciferian worldview is this idea that Satan was actually the good guy, God is actually the
Mhm.
bad guy, and that the only reason we have the story of God being the good guy is because God's the one who told he's the one who won, so he gets to tell the story. Well, we now have a whole bunch of these stories where kids are seeing this pattern so many
Yeah.
times that when someone presents them maybe to this idea of Luciferianism, all of a sudden they're like, oh, that seems plausible because I've heard it before. We
Mm.
want
Yes.
to be able to look at what stories our kids are listening to, or at least be able to talk through. Hey, what is true about this and what is false about this? Does this match what the biblical worldview is, or does this match what's opposite of the biblical worldview, and get them thinking about how, in fact, we did this with one of the Mama Bear's kids, where I'm trying to remember what movie it was. It was one of the ones we just did recently, but the kid literally said, it never occurred to me to think about what movies were trying to teach me.
Mm,
Every movie is trying to teach you something, and
that's
I would say that it didn't necessarily used to be that way, and I think it's because we had a Judeo-Christian worldview already imbued into all of these different stories and into these, story makers, and the case could not be made for the same today. In fact, it's trying to undermine it.
yeah,
Mm.
that's great.
Really good.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Your book is exciting. Your movement, your ministry is so important. I know a number of young women, young moms, and others who have been introduced into apologetics through that, and that's a good thing. I think the Christian church is growing stronger with those who are taking their faith seriously, seeking answers, and passing that on. And I think you have a lot to do with that. And so we're very
Good.
thankful for you. One final question. Any plans in the making for a Papa Bear Apologetics?
We always get asked that.
Yeah.
Um, so my husband has a talk that he does called "Defending the Faith by Defending the Family." I would say that I focused on moms for the questions specifically because moms are the ones that get the questions. They
That's
looked at
true.
the number of questions that a mom of young children gets, and it's more than the Queen of England gets during basically any interview. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just, hundreds. They even had there was this fad that went on for a little while with women carrying a clicker with them, and every time their kid asked a question, you did the clicker, and they were like counting how many questions. Dad became more important in the teen years, and especially when they start asking questions about politics and economics. But
Mm.
for everything else, they will walk past dad who's sitting on the couch and go into the bathroom where mom has locked the door and is shaving her legs in the
Mm,
bathtub and ask her where the pickles are because dad doesn't know anything, mom knows everything.
Mm.
Um, I would say the thing that our Papa Bears need to do more than anything is to be that papa bear of the family that says, "I am going to make y'all safe." In fact, Sean McDowell introduced me to a book called "Families in Faith" by Vern Bengston, and what it found is the transmission of faith. The highest correlate for transmitting the faith was a warm relationship with the father.
Mm. Wow.
More so than anything with the mom. So even though mom is important for all these questions, that warm relationship with the father was the number one predictor of transmission of faith. So for our papa bears out there, you are so important. And if you want to be part of that Papa Bear Apologetics, it may look a little bit different. Create that warm relationship with your kids and make them feel safe. Because when they feel safe, because you are protecting them, they know what it's like to feel safe with God protecting them. They can submit to God because they trust that He's there for their well being and their good and their protection, because that is the experience they've had with their father. That's the experience I had with my father. That's the experience I have with my husband. And I am able to take that straight into my experience with God. And you cannot underestimate that. So rise up, Papa Bears. We need you.
That's great.
That is really good.
Thank you so much for being with us today. It's a blessing. May God bless all that you put your hand to.
Oh, thank you. And you too.